Thank you for joining me in this demo. What we're going to talk about today is how a security analyst could utilize the Vulcan platform. And again, it's going to be from a security analyst perspective, so hopefully this will give you an idea of how you could utilize a platform to really consolidate the views, orchestrate the vulnerabilities to the right asset owner, be able to help remediate and get a full visibility of what's in there from a vulnerability perspective from all your different tools that you have. So the first thing that from Vulcan's perspective that we have is we're not a scanning tool. There's many scanners out there. And the idea is we didn't want to become another scanning tool. And also, organizations utilize scanning tools. They've already invested in them. So we wanted to make sure that we are able to leverage the existing the infrastructure that most customers and teams will have. So you can see one of the things that we could do very quickly is we could make some connections into existing scanning tools, and we have over 40 connectors that we connect into, and these connectors range from anything from infrastructure tools like AWS and Azure and Google, also tools that do SaaS and DaaS type of scanning, so things like Burp Suite, things like Veracode, Fortify, that'll do more of your DaaS and SaaS scanning. We also connect into your traditional scanning tools, things like Qualys and Tenable and Rapid7, and then also your cloud native type of tools. So your Prisma Cloud, your JFrog and Sneak and others from more of the cloud native side of things. And so the first thing we really do is we connect to these different tools via RESTful APIs, and we ingest the data, and then we merge the data for these assets from these different tools, and we merge them based on IP address, host name, FQDN, OS version, cloud ID. So there's a number of different ways that we could actually do the merge. Then we take that merged data and we normalize it. And when we merge the data, and what we do is we call these things called vulnerability instances, right? So you could have multiple vulnerabilities tied to multiple assets, and then we normalize the data to see if it's a host, if it's a SaaS, if it's a DaaS, if it's cloud resources, if it's images from a containers aspect of things, and then we correlate that data from the vulnerabilities perspective to our Remedy Cloud database, and I'll dive into the Remedy Cloud database a little bit more in detail. So those are all the different types of things we use to ingest the data from a inventory and a vulnerability perspective. The next thing we could do is we could connect to some of the tools that allow us to orchestrate the data to the right asset owner, things like ServiceNow and Jira. Are tools that we utilize in order to orchestrate that data and get it out to the right asset owner. We have a two-way connection into some of these ticketing tools like ServiceNow and Jira, so we could open up the ticket from Vulcan, and then once we see that the vulnerability has been resolved, we will be able to close the ticket out as well. We also connect into collaboration tools, things like Slack and Teams, in order to collaborate and notify team members that vulnerability is there and the details around this. And finally, we also have connectivity into tools like Avanti and SCCM and CrowdStrike and others, which allows us to actually do some of the remediation steps and the deployments. So for instance, SCCM, we have the ability to create device collection group and software update groups. While we're correlating the vulnerability to the OS and the version, we'll create these groups and we'll send it out to a SCCM tool where the administrator could continue following his normal task of QA and test, and then right from the tool very quickly just right click and deploy out to the right device collection group. So those are the different things that we do from from a Vulcan platform perspective, from an ingestion and connector perspective. The next thing from an analyst perspective, typically you would want to go in and set up how you actually do your risk prioritization and what is your risk modeling. So there are many tools out there that utilize the technical severity, which is a CVSS score, which tells you technically how severe is this vulnerability, which is very good from a technical point of view to understand what the vulnerability is, but it doesn't give you the full picture. So from Vulcan's perspective, we look at the CVSS score, we correlate that with threat intel, so we connect to a number of different threat intels, things like exploit DB, Metasploit, GitHub, NVD, MITRE CVE, PacketStorm, your typical ones that you're familiar with. And we also connect to some sources that are not so typical. We connect to a source in China, we connect to a source in Netherlands. And what we're looking for in these threat intel is to see if there's a open malware campaign, if the vulnerability is exploitable, if it's weaponized from an AppSec side of things, if it's part of the OWASP top 10. So we correlate that data into the technical severity score. And then we also correlate into how it's impacting into your environment through these things called tags and business groups. And the idea is, even after you know the technical severity of a vulnerability and how it is in the wild, but until you figure out what impact does it have in your environment, that really doesn't give you the full picture. So that's the last piece of this is we allow you to create business groups and groups of your assets and give it an impact, and we'll take that into the overall scoring of risk. Also, some of our customers really want a more granular way of creating these risk models. For instance, you might need to create exceptions. You might have a server that's sitting behind a firewall that is not external facing at all, but your dev team is utilizing it for testing, and they have a Java package that, for instance, your scanner, like Tenable, keeps flagging. We could build an exception into that, so we could get pretty granular with the risk modeling through Python scripts that our customer success team can help out. The next thing is we have the ability to go in and define your SLAs for your critical, high, and medium. And this is SLAs for your vulnerabilities, your campaigns, which I'll touch on a little bit, as well as your analytics when we give you the overall picture of how you're doing. And finally, the last thing is we have a concept of SPR, and what really at a high level SPR, and I'll dive down into SPR a little bit later, but SPR giving you the ability to set your risk appetite for your company, and then being able to say below that risk appetite, things are compliance, and above it, things aren't in compliance. It gives a very quick way of giving you the overall posture of your company. So let's dive a little bit further down. If I go into my dashboard here, you can see this gives me the overall view of my environment. It tells me my security posture rating is 89%, which is good. That means 89% of my assets are below that threshold that I've set, which was set at 70. I'm getting some high level views within my dashboard here. I could see the number of critical vulnerabilities. I could see how many of those have been fixed in the last 24 hours. I could see the available fixes that are there. If I go further down, I could see the latest activity that's happening in my environment, all the highest risk vulnerabilities, the new vulnerabilities discovered. But again, from an analyst perspective, this is giving me a full 1,000-foot view of everything, right? Typically, as a security analyst, I have focused view that I want. And within the Vulcan platform, what we allow you to do is really look into these things called business groups. And what a business group really is one, it allows you to pull any of the tags and groups that you've created in all the different tools that we connect to and ingest data from. So AWS and Burp Suite and Qualys and others. And really you could utilize those tags and add an impact score to it. Or you could create your own business group. So basically you'll be able to go in based on a criteria, create a group and add an impact associated with it. So for instance, I could say anything that contains prod, so that'll, alluding toward production. So anything in the naming convention that has production in my hosts, in my code projects, in my websites, which is my DAS and pen testing and my images and my cloud resources, it'll go in and create a group out of those. The other things that we could do is we could add in, and you can see we could get pretty granular with creating this group. It could be part of a particular subnet. It could be that I'm pulling in information from a particular tag that's coming in from, let's say my Qualys environment, and really get granular with what you want from a criteria perspective. Then I would give it a name here, and I would give it an impact score. So you could say this is a high impact because this is my production environment. Now, if I save this, this will now add a high impact for all these different assets, the 2,800 assets that got matched with this particular business group that I've created, and this will have an impact on the overall score, right? So we'll dive into that a little bit more in detail. But I'm not going to save this since I already have a number of different groups that business groups that I've already set up. So if I go into my dashboard here, you could see now I could scroll down and choose the business group. And if I look at my business group here, I have an external facing business group that for this scenario, I'm responsible for external facing application on the cloud, and specifically Linux environments. And you can see now everything changes in my dashboard for that particular business group. So now you can see my overall security posture rating went up, which is a good thing. I could see my critical vulns. I could see how many of them have been discovered more than 30 days, the latest activity. Very similar look to what we saw earlier, but this is focused in on that particular business group. So here you can see that my latest security business group for external facing application is 89% from a security posture rating. I have over 2,700 vulnerable assets. I also have over 4,700 unique vulnerabilities, and I could dive down into that and get more details around this. So now when I look at this, very quickly, I could see all the critical high, medium, and low vulnerabilities. I could get details around what it is, what is a risk score, what is the sources that we pulled this information from, when was it first seen, when was it last seen, the number of assets that were being impacted, and the versions of the OSs, the SLAs that it was breached, the threat intel, and the business group. But again, 4,700 for an analyst to go through is a lot. So what we really allow you to do is really slice and dice this data down with this contextual search within the Vulcan platform. So I could go in and say, hey, anything coming in from AWS, and you can see that narrowed that down to from 4,000 to 2,000. And I could get further and further granular with this contextual search, and I could save this. And the idea is now, if I save this, I could go in and pull up that search every time I come in here. And for instance, I have a saved search here for a particular criteria. And now when I pull this up, this will always bring up everything that meets that particular criteria here. So this particular saved search, what I've done is I've said that anything, wait a couple of seconds here, we'll go back. Anything that is of a risk level of high and a CVSS score of 5 or higher, and has an asset source coming from AWS and Azure, and as from a OS perspective, is CentOS, show me that. So it narrowed that 4,000 assets vulnerabilities down to this particular vulnerability that I could look at. And then I could get details around this. So I could go dive down further and do some analysis of why my risk score is what it is, right? So you can see the risk score, the CVSS score is 6.6 here, but my overall maximum risk here is 88. And so why did Vulcan increase the risk from a medium to a high, which is what 88 is? You can see that threat intel is exploitable. So we found that, when we looked at the threat intel, it's exploitable in the wild. And then also we found 6 high impact groups that this particular vulnerability is part of. So now we are actually saying that it actually directly impacts your assets that are of a high criticality to you, right? So that's why we increased the score to 88. I could get more details around where we found the exploits information, and I could just links to it, so you could get to it. We could go get more information around the attack vector. We could get descriptions, the CVE scores, so CVEs associated with it, and then also the fixes. Now here, what we'll do is we will show you all the different fixes that are coming in from the scanning tools that we've connected and ingested data from, as well as from our vulnerability cloud database, Remedy Cloud database here. And what the Remedy Cloud database is what we've done from Vulcan's perspective, and this is very unique to Vulcan. We have algorithms that go out and get fixes and the vulnerabilities associated with them and the fixes. We also have our security team that goes in and start doing some research around workarounds and compensating controls as well, and creating these scripts that allow you to fix the vulnerabilities very quickly. So now, if I wanted to update this kernel version to 3.10 for the CentOS OS, what we could actually do is very quickly just download this Ansible playbook. And now, as a security analyst, what has happened is I could go in and here's a script. I could go in and actually take the actual script and go in and install it, and it'll fix my vulnerability. Typically, most large environments, the security analyst isn't the guy who's able to fix the actual problem. So you would need to get this information over to the right asset owner to be able to fix the problem. So from here, what I could do is I could take an action and I could go in and open up a ticket. Now, the ticket could be via emails, it could be integration into Jira or integration into ServiceNow. For instance, Jira's perspective, I could very quickly go in and add the remediation scripts that were created and pulled in from the Remedy Cloud database. We've also correlated the OS and version to the actual fix that's needed. We could assign it to the project, the assignee that is associated with it. What type of issue is it? Is it a task? Is it a subtask? Is it a story? You are able to choose, what status gets changed once it gets done. You're also able to add an SLA. So, how do you want to configure the SLAs? Do you want it to be, started on today's date? And then, how long do you want this SLA to be configured for? We could give it a title here. So we could go in and say, this is CentOS kernel issue, right? So here, what we will also get is the vulnerability, the information that we're getting from the threat intel, the CVSS score, all that information, all the assets that are being impacted, all that information is already pre-populated, including the remedies in here. And also we'll attach a CSV file with all the assets that are impacted as well. And now, if I go in and open the ticket up, this will open the ticket up in Jira, and we'll have the capability of tracking this via something called campaigns, and I'll talk about campaigns in a bit more. But think about what we've just done. Typically, when you go in and go to an asset owner who might be in the operations team, might be in the DevOps team, might be in the development team, depending on what you're opening the ticket for, he has his day job. He's doing things that is relevant to his work on a daily basis, and most people don't have the time. So when you go in and open up this ticket, he's probably going to ignore it because he has 99 other things he needs to get done before this vulnerability needs to be fixed for him. So how do you get this person to be more inclined to actually doing the fix? And the way you could actually do that is providing him with all the information and work that he would typically need to do beforehand, before you send him the ticket. So what we've already done, we've embedded the ticket with the script that he needs to use to fix it. We've already said we've already associated which vulnerabilities and OSs and the fixes. We've correlated all that information. We've put in the description. We've put in the fix. We've done 3/4 of the work for him. So now when we actually send him the ticket, he's going to be more inclined to actually doing the work, right, and getting the remediation done. The second half of the problem isn't just, hey, can you get this guy to actually do the remediation? The second half of the problem is, how do you actually track that? How do you actually know that he's actually fixed it without having to continuously email him, continuously go into the ticketing system and finding out if he actually done the work or not? And that's where campaigns comes in. Within the campaigns, from a Vulcan's perspective, what we have the ability to do is track the life cycle of that vulnerability. So what we're able to do is very quickly see all the activities that are happening within that ticket. We have the ability to go in to the actual ticket and open up, for instance, the Jira ticket and actually get the details of where it's at, right? So you could see that right from the platform. Other things is we could track what's happening. So I could see all the vulnerability, what it is that actually the vulnerability was, which assets are impacting. And for each of the assets, I'm able to track what's happening with it, right? So is it in progress? Is it fixed? And the way we're getting this information is when the scanners, for instance, Tenable, or if you have Qualys, when they actually do the scans of that asset and comes back and says, yes, this vulnerability has been fixed, we will move this from in progress to fixed. And if there was multiple assets here, the percentage of success will go up. And eventually what will happen once it goes to 100, we will go in and actually close the ticket out, and we'll move this from open to closed state, right? So that's what happens from a campaign perspective. Now think about this, the value that you're getting out of this is being able to track everything without having to bother the asset owner to say, hey, where are you? You know, have you actually fixed this? Did you actually get this done? It's all in the tip of your mouse click and within the Vulcan platform. So some of the other things we could provide, going back to the scenario, you know, going from the fix to the assets, we also give you the capability of viewing this from another view, not only from a vulnerabilities perspective, but if I wanted to see that particular asset, what vulnerabilities that were there, we could show it to you from that aspect as well. All the open ports, inbound and outbound, these are coming in from the AWS security groups. I could take an action and I could open up the Jira ticket based on this particular asset now, right? So giving you multiple views. So some of the things that we could do within, I'll talk a little bit about the asset view that we have, is really slicing and dicing the data down, right? Being able to say, hey, show me everything from AWS, and it's part of a CentOS, it'll narrow that down very quickly. So being able to get to the information quickly is a key aspect of from a security analyst perspective job. Other things we could do is take actionable steps. So here, since we got all the inventory data and data coming in from CMDB, for instance, from ServiceNow, and I also have information coming in from your scanners, I could go in and say, hey, show me everything that hasn't been scanned, right? So here, there's 641 assets that haven't been scanned by the scanning tool. So for instance, I could, if you guys were utilizing, if a customer is utilizing Tenable, I could push this information right over to Tenable and have them do the scanning, or I could even export it out and say, hey, here are the 641 assets that you haven't scanned. Please scan these so we could make sure we have a complete view of all the assets and what vulnerabilities that are associated with them. Other things that we could do, if you have you know, connectivity into SaaS type of scanners, for instance, check marks, we could go in and see a very similar view. I could go in and see all the code projects and the code base, the vulnerabilities associated with them. I could go in and look at the details as I was able to for that vulnerability and get more details around it. I could also see the fixes associated with it, the details around it, the assets that were impacted, and then take the same type of actions that I was able to do for the host. Very similar, I could do for any of your pen testing, any of your DAS type of scanning. So for instance, if I go in and look at my Burp Suite dynamic scan, this will show you all the applications, all the pages that you're actually scanning, the vulnerabilities associated with them. And again, you know, being able to take the similar type of actions there. For all your images, so you know, if you have images that you're using for you know, your cloud native applications, whether they're coming in from ECR, whether they're coming in from Sneak, whether they're coming in from Palo, we're able to go in and look at all those vulnerabilities associated with the images, and then being able to open up tickets and do the similar actions that we were able to do earlier. And then finally, from a cloud resource perspective, we're adding the capability of picking up any misconfigurations that you would typically have in your cloud. So tools like AWS, you know, allows you to pick up misconfigurations in their services. So for instance, if you're configuring a S3 bucket and you leave it at anonymous, that's a bad configuration. There could be vulnerabilities associated with that. You know, tools like AWS picks that up, as well as CSPM tools like Aqua. Well, they go for you know, multi-cloud environments like AWS and Azure and GCP and Oracle. They pick up misconfigurations in these tool sets and then they give you the ability to show you how to actually fix them. We will be able to correlate and bring those in as well. So that's from an asset perspective, everything that we could do. Another view we have is our Remedy Cloud database. So again, very focused on what Vulcan could provide only, and the idea here is to be able to query your assets specific vulnerability remediations, and then make decisions based on this. For instance, if I wanted to go in and we have the ability to go in and give you a number of different types of fixes, so advisory information, scanning information, if any of the scripts we provide, any of the Windows advisory information. So for instance, if you were wanting to search a particular Windows version of Windows fix, what we could do very quickly is to go in and show you here is a remedy for a March update for Windows servers. You can see that it has solving 87 vulnerabilities, impacting 9 of my assets. We've also done the correlation work and told you, hey, if you install this superseding vulnerability, superseding patch, this will solve all these 87 vulnerabilities. You could take an action, via SCCM. So I could go in and create a configuration group, device collection group, as well as a software update group, and deploy it out to SCCM very quickly to be able to fix. Other ways that customers utilize this for is to figure out how they could have an impact on the overall security posture. So for here, you have the ability to go in and say, hey, if I install this particular kernel version update, right, this is going to impact my security posture by 15%, which is a good amount. So you can see, if I go in and this is, having 29 vulnerabilities, but it's impacting 376 of my assets. And some of these vulnerabilities are pretty high in risk. So again, I could take the actions, go in and open up a Jira ticket, deploy an Ansible script as needed to get this fixed. Other ways that customers really try to use this is around workarounds, right? So, if I go in and search for workarounds, this particular SIG-Red vulnerability is on a DNS server. And what it's doing is allowing remote code execution on here. There's no fix for this vulnerability, but if you go in and update this particular registry key on it, you'll be able to get a workaround around this. So I could go in and take action utilizing my CrowdStrike agent that's on that box endpoint, and I could go in and actually create the registry key and get this resolved, right? So this is how some of our customers would actually utilize the Remedy Cloud database. Again, we're providing you with not only vulnerabilities and the fixes, but also compensating controls, workarounds, very, very specific to Vulcan, and no one else in the industry actually has this. Now, the last two things that I want to touch up on is the first is around automation. Now, as you start getting more and more advanced with your vulnerability management program, you would want to start taking the human factor out of this. And allowing the security analysts to do things that are more important, right? So like doing the remediation, helping out with the remediation and other things, and taking the mundane task out of the day-to-day things that they would need to do. So within Vulcan, we have this concept called playbooks, and what playbooks really allow you to do is automate. And I'll follow the same scenario that I've spoke about earlier. Is I want to say and automate an action based on every time I find a critical vulnerability that is associated with my external facing application. So the first thing you do is build a criteria. So my criteria here is, for instance, it's coming in from an AWS source. What are my criteria, additional criteria? You can see it gets pretty granular. You could pick a particular package, it could particular affected vendor. It could be, a particular asset, a number of assets. It could be for a certain risk level. So I could say, if it's a risk of critical, and let's say we're dealing with, you're talking about your AppSec out of town. You want to say threat intel coming that is exploitable, and it is from the OWASP top 10, right? Those are the criteria I'm going to use, and then the host that's getting impacted. So you could say it's coming in from a tag that is external facing. So again, external facing was my business group, so I'm going to continue using that. And it has an OS of CentOS, which is what I'm responsible for. So I built the criteria here for the automation, and then I'm going to take the remediation action, right? The remediation action could be, creating an SCCM deployment, again, configuration group, or device collection and a software update group, or it could be, going back to my scenario of opening up a Jira ticket per vulnerability. How do I want to do this? It could be separate per asset. It could be an aggregated view, and then if I find new things that meet the criteria, how do you want to update it? Do you want to update it per, to subsequent discoveries? How do you want to do it per asset? And then very similar to what we saw earlier, we want to embed the script, what projects is part of, what assignee, what issue type it is, assigning, set the SLAs here for X amount of days, and then going in and filling out the relevant information here. But the key thing here is I could change some of these things. So I could go in and say, okay, so now I opened up the Jira ticket, but I also want to post up on my Slack channel that, hey, this vulnerability has been found. So I could go in and do that. And then from an SLA perspective, since I'm responsible for this, again, it could be for each separate ticket, per asset or consolidated view, send me the email, right? So I'm going to get this email. So now what happens is we look at all our vulnerability instances in our system, and we see which matches this criteria. Now, once this thing has been met, we'll take the actions that we've set, and then anything new coming in from ingestion perspective from the different scanning and tools that meet the criteria will also take the same actions. So that's how automation works, and we have customers that as they get advanced, they start automating a lot of their tasks that some of the security analysts will do. Finally, the last piece out of this whole thing is, so now we gave you the capability of ingesting data from multiple tools, so you get that centralized view. We also gave you the ability to correlate that data with the different types of tools. So we're correlating the data with threat intel. We're correlating the data with your assets that are internal. We gave you the capability of orchestrating that data and getting the asset owner to fix that information through integration with ticketing tools. We gave you the ability to go in and search the remediation database to figure out how you could increase your security posture overall. And then we helped you do some automation work once you want to start freeing up some of your security analysts from the mundane tasks that they do on a regular basis. The last thing is reporting, right? So you want to see from an analyst perspective, two things. What is your risk? And then the flip side of it is how you're doing from a remediation perspective. And then finally, SLA tracking. So from a risk perspective, you really want to go in and see trending information, right? And we spoke about the security posture rating a little bit, and I'll dive down a little bit on how we actually do the calculations here to really show you why this is really a game changer from how typically the industry is doing risk analysis of your environment, right? So here you can see my overall security posture rating for the number of assets and the trend of it, right? And typically you would want your security, this is a demo environment, so it's actually stagnant, but you would want your security posture rating over time to be increasing. And then we have this concept of risk mask. Now, so what is risk mask? Now think of risk mask where in order to understand risk mask, you need to get a little bit more detail into the security posture rating. So typically, when you're calculating risk, most companies and tools utilize averages or some type of average or weighted average. And that could be deceiving at times. So for instance, let's take an example. You have 3 assets in your environment, and 2 of those assets have high risk, and a 3rd asset has a low risk. And for some reason, you go in and you remediate the low risk. Now, when you remediate the low risk asset, because you're taking the average of the first 2 assets now increases your overall risk score, right? Which is not what's supposed to happen. It's actually, if you're remediating something, your risk score should actually go down. And this is where the risk mask comes in. So we knew that we couldn't just take the average. So what we did is we associated a mask score, atomic mask score for each asset, and we did a culmination or addition of all the risk mass that you have in a particular group or in your overall environment. And so now what ends up happening is if someone goes in and remediates even the lower risk of a low risk asset, the risk mask will show either the increase or the decrease accordingly, very clearly, right? So that's how the risk mask and the overall security posture rating works, and how we feel that it's actually going to be a pretty good game changer within the industry itself. You could see now, we could see risk mask over time. So now if your security posture rating is going up, your risk mask or your overall risk that you have in your environment should be decreasing. Again, this is a demo environment, so it's not actually showing you that. Vulnerability instances over time, you would want to be going down. We could break this down per business group associated with the risk mask and the security posture rating. And very quickly, you could slice and dice this data down. So I could go in and say, hey, I want this only for a particular business group. So I could go in and choose that, for a particular date and time, for a particular threat type. So really allowing you to slice and dice the data down. Some of the other data information, what is your critical high, medium, and low over a period of time? Using risk mask again to make decisions like, okay, my threat intel is telling me that my highest thing that's bothering me from a threat intel perspective is the unauthenticated vulnerabilities, right? So I would need to focus in on those. Or maybe from a OWASP top 10 perspective, broken access control is the one that's the most, has the most risk mask. So that's what I should be focusing in on from a remediation perspective. And then hopefully your unscanned assets that we're actually picking up is actually going down, because you're able to pick that up and send it back to the scanning tool team to actually rescan those assets that we're finding that are not being scanned. And the good thing about this is now I could take this and export this report out, send it to my executives as needed, or run with it to my next meeting, in order to utilize it to make decisions and show my overall team where the progress is from a risk perspective. The same with remediation. So not only do you want to know what my risk is over a period of time, but you also want to know how am I performing from a remediation perspective. So being able to see what are vulnerable, what are fixed, what are ignored, being able to see from a time factor, how long has a critical vulnerability been around for? Is it less than 30 days, between 30 to 60 days, greater than 30 days? Same thing from a high and medium vulnerability perspective. That's an important factor, metric that you would want to gauge. Also, mean time to remediation for each of these, for critical, medium, and low, being able to see that as well. And then finally, also being able to see, not only do you want to know how many vulnerabilities have actually remediated, but also wanting to compare that to how many have been introduced, right? You could be fixing a lot, but you could be getting a tenfold of remediation of vulnerabilities coming in, and overall, you're not able to see the progression. This chart allows you to see that. And then again, I can take this out and run with it to my next meeting, or send it to my executives as needed. And then finally, the last piece is around the SLAs. Based on what you've set from an SLA perspective, I could get a KPIs around, which of my critical, medium, high, low vulnerabilities SLAs have been breached. For those, how long have they been breached for, right? So, for my critical, what is the longest running SLAs for? You could break this down by business group. You could break it down by critical, high, medium, and low, vulnerabilities that are breaching, vulnerabilities that have been breached from an SLA perspective. So that gives you some more text. Again, slicing and dicing that data down is available again for this report, and then being able to export it out. So hopefully, this gave you a good idea of what the Vulcan platform, the value it could provide from a security analyst perspective, how they would be able to utilize this, and how a company can utilize the platform to really get a single pane of glass of all their vulnerabilities, really quickly prioritize those vulnerabilities, and then be able to take actionable steps and orchestrate to the asset owner what the vulnerabilities that they need to fix, track that end to end, and then be able to automate some of the tasks that are needed, and then also have the ability to figure out what things they should actually fix that will increase the overall security posture, and then get further analytics back on this. Thank you very much for taking the time to listening to this.